On today's show, the origins of Locked On Rockets, a peek behind the curtains into NBA media reporting, and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we are brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Download the app today. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Joining us now is a very special guest, longtime journalist, New York Times author, host of the AI Curious podcast, but most importantly, lifelong Houston Rockets fan and loyal everydayer, Jeff Wilser. Jeff, I'm so excited to have you here on the program for what is hopefully going to be a really fun episode today.
Jackson, I am fired up, honored to be here, excited to dive into all things Jackson Gatlin.
Peek behind the curtain, guys. Jeff brought this idea to me of, you have so many, loyal everydayers, fans who love the Rockets, but not only love the Rockets, but also enjoy hearing your opinions, your analysis, your takes about the Rockets. And he suggested the idea, hey, let's do a peek behind the curtain. Let's get a look at what your life is like covering the Houston Rockets as a credentialed media member, as somebody who goes to the games, interviews players, does all this. And so we're going to do something different here on the show. For the first time in the 6+ seasons that I've recorded the show, I am not going to be the one hosting the show. And to do this, if you're watching on YouTube, here we go. We're flipping the sides here.
Oh,
I'm going to sit on the guest side of the podcast. This is a weird feeling for me, Jeff, but here we go, man. I'm going to give the reins over to you. You're going to run the show. Let's rock, man.
I didn't realize we're making history today. I am so honored by this. All right. So our first segment of LOR today, we will discuss the Jackson Gatlin origin story. So Jackson, I'm very curious. We know you're a Rockets fan, lifelong fan, but give us a sense of what are some of your earliest Rockets memories? When did you become a fan? And who were your kind of early heroes back in the day? What era was this of Rocket Lands?
Yeah, man. So, I mean, I was born in 95. So, I'm on the younger end of the Rockets spectrum, so I just missed the tail end of being able to really enjoy the title era Rockets and all that. But I grew up with the Steve Francis, Cuttino Mobley Rockets. Like, that's when I really started to, enjoy and appreciate basketball. I remember Yao Ming being drafted. I remember being so excited about all that. And Stevie Franchise was the first player to really make me fall in love with the game of basketball. I'm going to backtrack that. Maybe not make me fall in love, but get interested in basketball. And then it was the acquisition of Tracy McGrady. The T-Mac Yao era Rockets is when I really started to, my love for the game deepened. I started to dive into all sorts of stuff. I remember, back in the mid 2000s during that era of Rockets basketball, like coming to my dad with like hypothetical trades and running like the NBA trade machine and stuff and thinking like the Rockets could go get this guy, or maybe they should trade for Jeff Green at the top of the draft, and all these different like hypotheticals and scenarios. I remember wanting Rashard Lewis on those T-Mac Yao era Rockets so badly. So many different hypotheticals and different things that I would pour over. And so it was that era that really got me hooked on the game, and I never really looked back. I've been a diehard Rockets fan for what I consider my whole life, but it was the T-Mac Yao era Rockets that really heightened my love for the game.
In full circle, young Jackson, who was coveting Jeff Green, you got your wishes many years later.
Absolutely, I did. No, I mean, dude, the number of times that I had these like trades drafted up with the Seattle Supersonics, where I was like, how can we get our hands on Rashard Lewis and Jeff Green? Like, I want them so bad. So
I love it. So you were a fan for many years. When were you interested in the actual career path of sports media? What sparked that interest, and what made you realize, oh, this could actually happen? It's not just a fantasy.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Houston. That's where I graduated. Go Cougs. But that was my first pit stop. I did, HCC for a little while, knocked out community college. And when I went to the University of Houston, I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. For a chunk of my life, I thought I wanted to be an architect because I was like, I like designing and, you know, building, and that's really cool. And then I found out math was involved. And if you're a loyal everydayer, you know that I suck at math. I can't do numbers.
Math is not mathing, as you would sometimes say.
There you go. So, and the math never maths in my head, unfortunately. So I knew that wasn't really probably the career path for me. I did my very first semester at University of Houston majoring in economics, which was miserable. I hated doing it. The hypothetical donuts to country X for hypothetical coffee from country Y, and it was a mess. So I kind of slogged through that first semester, did some soul searching, and identified. I was like, okay, what am I passionate about? What am I good at? I'd always considered myself a pretty strong writer. And so then I took that and I said, well, I love the Rockets, and kind of naturally that led me to the idea of doing sports journalism. So that very following semester, I gutted out a 2.5 GPA as an economics major just to be able to transfer into the College of Journalism, and made it there. And then the rest is history. I mean, I hit the ground running. I took like 4 journalism classes my first semester, fell in love with it immediately, started writing for the school newspaper not 3 weeks after signing up for all those classes, and started covering University of Houston sports. And I even started a bi-weekly column at the school newspaper called Rocket Fuel, where I talked about the Rockets, a little bit in the school newspaper, which they were like, we don't really talk about professional sports here. And I was like, but I want to. And they were like, okay, fine, we'll let you.
Do those exist somewhere online, or the archives? Can we?
You know what? I can find one. I know of one that got aggregated by Yahoo Sports, and it was a practice that I was allowed to attend. So I reached out to the Rockets and I was like, hello, yes, I'm a student journalist. Will you please let me come to a practice? And they actually let me into the practice where Mike D'Antoni and the rest of the Rockets media, whatever, they were reacting to, if you'll remember, Spitgate between CP3 and Rajon Rondo, that early season Rockets-Lakers game where Rondo and CP3 got into it, and Rondo spat on CP3, and that became a big, or sorry, I apologize, CP3 spat on Rondo and got suspended a couple games for it. And so that practice that I got into was Chris Paul's first game back from suspension. And I remember CP so vividly, him saying, Tim McMahon from ESPN like asked him, what did you learn during your suspension? He's like, what did I learn? I learned suspensions are expensive, man. I lost a lot of money from those 2 games. And it was a great little moment. And I got the chance to ask MDA a question about the double teams that Harden was facing. I didn't see Harden at that practice. He had a previous engagement with Adidas. So that was a bit of a bummer for me, but it was still a really cool first time experience in a professional setting. And that definitely, further ignited the flame and the passion to want to pursue that career path.
Well, and from that point, you had a few different branches you could take. You could take, okay, cool, I want to be like a sports beat writer, or I want to write for sports websites, or I want to go on TV, be kind of a studio guy, right? So what nudged you to pursue podcasts, and specifically LOR? How did that all come about?
Yeah, so I basically, I'll be completely honest, Jeff, I kind of fell ass backwards into the podcasting bit. I thought I was going to be a writer. Like that's where I thought I was headed. And I wound up garnering, an internship with ESPN 97.5 here in Houston, and then leveraged that into a full-time producer position with Sports Talk 790. I became their weekend sports producer for a handful of their shows. And along the way, I basically, at one point I had a class, and one of my professors, she suggested, hey, reach out to 2 industry professionals that of the industry that you are trying to break into. And the 2 professionals that I reached out to were Matt Thomas, longtime PA announcer, now full-time radio play-by-play announcer for the Houston Rockets, and the podfather himself, Ben Dubose. I love 2
good choices to reach out to.
I think it worked out pretty well. And so, I reached out to Ben, and Ben was so, I'd followed Ben for years. His coverage of the Rockets was one of the ways that I stayed in tune with the team. I listened to LOR for years before, taking over as the host. And when I reached out to him, we got together, we met for lunch, we talked, I interviewed him about his career and kind of his, foray into sports journalism and how he made a life doing it and all of that. And we stayed in touch after that. So when the time came where Ben decided that he no longer wanted to host a 5-day-a-week daily podcast, we talked about it, closely, and I kind of made it on the short list of names to be his possible successor. And then after some interviews with David Locke, the CEO of Locked On, and a ringing endorsement from Matt Thomas, the other person that I reached out to, because Matt Thomas and David Locke are, longtime friends, and they're both radio play-by-play guys, so they go way back. I was the person who got, tapped to be to be Ben's replacement, and just kind of, I'll be honest, Jeff, nobody should have given me a 5-day-a-week podcast at the very beginning. I was so inexperienced, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I had so many great people who helped me along the way and really helped, kind of helped me grow and cultivate my voice and my ability to do this show. And I learned so much from so many other individuals. I would not be at this place that I am at today without the help of so many kind, gracious people who gave me their time, their expertise, their wisdom when I asked for advice or guidance, how to approach certain things, or tips and tricks for, improvement, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of how I became the host at the end of the day.
Final segment for segment 1, Jackson. When did you kind of like first come on with LOR? And I'm sure a lot of everydayers, some old timers might know this, but new ones be curious. And then any memories, any like growing pain memories of like, oof, that was a rough start.
Oh man, I've got too many I've got enough to probably fill up an entire podcast, let alone like a 60-second, end of a first segment bit. But I will say my first season was the James Harden, Russell Westbrook year. So 2019, 2020. And when I tell you, man, I signed up to do a daily podcast talking about the Rockets. And then that first week, I had to cover a geopolitical crisis when Daryl Morey tweeted "Free Hong Kong," and I reached out to Ben and I was like, "I just want to talk about basketball, man. I don't know about all this politics and everything."
The U.S. economy, the global economy.
I know it was so that was kind of absurd for me to handle. And then obviously COVID derailed the end of that season. So I had my first year covering the team was not normal whatsoever. And as far as like a standout memory, I will say this is one of my core memories, and it's kind of the antithesis of how I handle the show now. We were joking just before we hit the record button, for a peek behind the curtain for all the listeners, all the viewers, is, when I hit record, generally 99% of the time, whatever we record, whatever comes out of our mouths winds up in the show, right? That's why when I flub a word or when I stumble over my words, it's just there. I don't try to go back in and edit these out and have a million different cuts like a TikTok video or something. It's all just there. It's genuine. The very first podcast I ever recorded, Jeff, by myself in the studios of Sports Talk 790, because they had all this nice recording equipment, and I just had like a Blue Yeti mic at home, so I was trying to be really nice about it. It took me, I believe, 4.5 hours to record one 30-minute podcast, because I kept recording a segment and then I would re-listen to it and I'd be like, oh, I missed this, or I forgot to say this, and I was so hypercritical of myself. And then somewhere down the line, I kind of let go of that, and I was just like, you know what? I just need to be myself. I need to be genuine. I need to be authentic. And if I mess something up, I mess something up, and I can address it.
I think are a feature, not a bug, right? Because it sounds more authentic. People actually, you sound real as opposed to overly polished. So I think it's a great kind of like lesson for everyone in a sense.
Well, I really appreciate that. And that's certainly the kind of what I was hoping would come across in how I eventually transitioned from. Now, there's the occasional, like if we egregiously mess something up, or if there's an edit or something and we're just like, you know what, let's just chop this out. Or sometimes just for the sake of timeliness, I'll trim an episode a teensy bit. But outside of that, like outside of the occasional random cut here or there, or for the real everydayers who know that sometimes I publish an episode with a no word that probably shouldn't have been included, then, occasionally I'll go back in and fix something like that. But other than that, what you see is what you get with the podcast for the most part. Now, I know that coming up, you're going to be grilling me about the behind the scenes of NBA media, what it's like in the day of a life of an NBA reporter, what it's like attending games, interviewing players, all of that stuff. We're going to get to there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Skims. Look, when I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I'll admit I was intrigued. I've heard a lot about their quality from friends and family, so I gave them a try, and they absolutely live up to the hype. Having issues with underwear is the worst, right? Whether it's fit, comfort, quality, or just finding the right style, Skims completely changed the game. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried the Skims 5-inch boxer briefs, and I'm totally hooked. I don't think I'll ever go back to wearing anything else. They're perfect for an active lifestyle. They move with you. They never lose their shape, and they stay in place all day long. Whether you're working out or just out and about running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear that you will ever own. Plus, the lightweight material feels awesome, like you're almost wearing nothing at all, frankly. You can shop Skims Men's at skims.com. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Again, that's Skims Men's at skims.com.
And continuing on Locked On Rockets, we are going to grill Jackson all things behind the scenes of being the LOR host. So, Jackson, let's start with your game day. I want to get nitty gritty in the weeds. I want to see how the sausage is made. Let's like start with your pregame. So imagine let's start with a home game, then we'll switch to a away game. For home games, what's your pregame like? Are you going to the games? Where do you sit? What's the game experience like?
Yeah. So, and they're two very distinctly different things. So I'm glad that we're separating at home versus away. So home games, they're a bit daunting actually at the end of the day. Like a home game for me is generally like a 7 to 8 hour long process. It's basically a full blown work day.
Oh, wow.
Where
I had a vision of you just like watching a game with a beer, having a good time, later on, press record, and you call it a day.
Not quite, man. Not quite. No, it's certainly work at the end of the day. No, you generally want to get to Toyota Center. Doors open approximately an hour and a half before, or on game days they open at like 4 p.m. 3 hours before tip off. Basically, is the general lay of the land, with certain exceptions here and there. Ime Udoka, for a 7 p.m. tip off will speak at 5:15. So generally, I'm trying to get to Toyota Center no later than about 4:30, 4:45, so that I can get my stuff set up, settle in, make sure I have all my P's and Q's, and then I'll do kind of a walk through the stadium, kind of see if I can interact with anybody. Usually that early, there's not really anybody that you're going to want to be chatting up, talking to, whatever. But, I'll walk around, shake some hands. I'm friendly with all the ushers, a lot of the Rockets game day staff, I'm pretty close with. So just that kind of thing. And, Ime will speak at 5:15, and that's, it gets published on the pregame broadcast and everything. So generally going in, sometimes there's big storylines or something, and that might be a question that you want to ask Ime about, maybe somebody's injured or they might be held out, or maybe something happened recently that you want Ime's thoughts on. Pregame is also a really good time. If you have a question that is just completely unrelated to anything going on with the team, and you want to try and have a chance to ask something like a big picture kind of a question, like maybe it's an X's and O's thing or a big picture thing for further later on in the season, that's like the perfect time to kind of fish for some of those questions, because generally, you're not going to reveal much of anything in pregame, and you're also not reacting to much of anything in pregame. And then after Ime talks, there's about an hour and a half to kill before the game starts. Now, you can go to the visitors' locker room or press conference, and you can interview the opposing team head coach if there's anything you'd like to see or know about from the other side of the aisle. But generally, that hour and a half, I wind up, here's the real behind the scenes here is, having a credential is awesome, and being at the games is incredible. But having a credential in and of itself doesn't, you get to interview coaches, players, sure, but the real power of a credential is the people that you get to meet behind the scenes, and the people that you get a chance to interact with that you otherwise would never meet. People like you're talking about different, friends and family members of the players, agents, training staff members, coaches, like people that you would never have the opportunity to interact with if you just showed up to Toyota Center as a fan, because the credential allows you to walk around. You get to be, inside Toyota Center, you're in the back hallways, you're down on the court during pregame warmups. And it's those relationships that have garnered me a lot of insight into how the team operates, what certain expectations are of certain players. I remember going all the way back to when John Lucas was still an assistant coach with the Rockets, and Lucas loved to talk. Lucas loved hitting up anybody. And there were so many different times pregame where I'd just be posted up on one of the baselines watching, Rockets players get their warmups done. And Luke would just come over and pop a squat right next to me, and we'd talk for like 30, 45 minutes at a time, just because he was such an open book. He was so friendly and so incredibly insightful as one of the, as an incredibly gifted player and a gifted coach, talking about what the team was either struggling or going through, or, kind of his expectations, or just, random stories from back in the day, which were always really funny. So going through that whole process, it's kind of what you make of it, because you could just show up and just do the bare minimum and, interview the coach and go back to the media workroom and sit there and type up your story, or just, mess around on your laptop for a little bit, whatever. Or you can really cultivate and grow those relationships in the building. And that's where the credential has been so important to me. And I know it's very important to, a number of other media members as well, from that perspective. So you do that. And then, fast forward a little bit to the game itself.
Yeah,
and the game is,
so where are you sitting? What's your vantage point? Are you taking notes when you're watching? What's that overall experience like compared to watching as a fan?
Yeah, so when you're watching on TV, there's cameras at the top of the lower bowl section, right smack dab in the middle. That's how a Toyota Center is built. There are two media sections directly adjacent to that, to the left and to the right. I generally sit in the one to the left of that, so I have a pretty great vantage point. My view of the game is pretty much identical to the TV camera view, and honestly, I love that, because there's one other media section that the Rockets have, which is it's for more like senior media. Like Jonathan Fagan would sit down there. Daniel Lerner has a seat down there. Kelly Eco has a seat down there. And it's like, but it's in the corner behind the visiting team bench. And it's a very weird angle. I've only sat down there for exactly one game against the Wolves one day, and I hated it. I was like, please don't ever put me down there again. Like it was a tough viewing experience. And there's certain things that you can see while you're down there. Like you can see player reactions on the bench. You can see certain things that you don't see from upstairs, I guess. But I don't like it from to consume the game, which is what's the most important thing to me. I'm taking notes the whole time during a game. Like I have my Google Doc spreadsheet, and I take notes about the most miscellaneous crazy things. I'll try and record certain shooting patterns of players. I'll record different, this team went on this run at this stage of the game. Oh, there was this possession where there were, 3 offensive rebounds, and it led to 3, either poor shots or missed threes or different opportunities. I try to map out the key inflection points of the game throughout my notes, to where by the end I have like a solid, probably about 2-ish pages of notes on a Google document that I then parse through later before recording my show to pick and choose, like, okay, this is what I'm leading the show with. This is the main story, the segment 1. Then these are the miscellaneous notes that I'm going to talk about here in segment 2, or the final thoughts in segment 3, that kind of thing.
So before we get to what the actual recording the pod is like, walk through your away game routine. I'm guessing that's is it sneakily a lower lift day because there's not as much pregame stuff you can do? Are you basically watching the game on TV, or what is that process like?
Yeah, no, the away games are significantly easier. I will say the away games in person are a completely different experience, because home games, the Rockets players are generally under lock and key pretty well, right? They're in the locker room, or they know where they can go to like avoid media, right? They've got their personal areas that are not open to media to access. Now, generally, rule of thumb for the NBA is the locker rooms, both visiting and home locker rooms, have to be open for approximately 30 minutes before tip-off at some point. So the locker rooms are open, but generally players are pretty smart, and they know to just not be in the locker room if they don't want to talk to you for tip-off. You're generally not going to get anything great from the players pregame anyways. So basically on the road, though, when the players are not in their home turf and they don't have all this Rocket staff and security kind of guarding, the team travels and has PR that travels and security that travels, but restrictions are a lot more lax on the road. Let's just put it that way, because, you've got the arena home security that's dealing with, the Mavericks or the Spurs or whoever. And then the Rockets,
they're kind of an island a little bit, so you're able to have easier access. Yeah,
there's a little bit more access to be had on the road, but road games where I'm not traveling, where I'm just at home, I pull it up. I've got my double monitor set up right here in front of me. I have the game open. I've got my notes on another tab. Watching games in my boxer sometimes, just hanging out. It's a much more relaxing kind of atmosphere, because again, I mentioned, a game day experience is sometimes 7-8 hours long by the end of it, because not only do you have the finish of the game, then you handle post game with Ime Udoka, and then post game interviews with the players, and then to wrap all that up, like that's the 7 or 8 hours right there. And then I still got to go home and then prepare the show and then actually record the show. So that's another hour-ish on top of that, maybe a little longer depending on post editing and things like that. Whereas at home, I settle in, and I'll watch the game, turn it on right around tip-off time, spend 2.5 hours watching the game, catch the post-game interview with Ime, maybe see reactions to social media, that kind of thing, for about 30 or so minutes after the game concludes. And then I'm firing up the podcast by 10 p.m. at the latest for a 7 p.m. tip-off. That's generally how it works.
So do you, for home games, do you try and record the pod that very night, or is that the next morning record session? How does it usually break out?
That's always the goal, Jeff. It's always the goal to record the night of and to get it out as soon as possible. However, I'll be completely honest. One of the things about doing this podcast is at the end of the day, this podcast is about being entertaining too. It's about having fun. It's about appreciating and enjoying the Rockets. It's not just a diehard, I don't pretend to be some top tier 99th percentile analyst about the team. Like, we like to have fun on the podcast. We crack jokes. We have, hopefully there's good energy with the show. And, unfortunately at the end of the day, after dealing with, real life stuff potentially, and then a 7 or 8 hour, call it a work day at the game, and then coming home and prepping everything. Sometimes there have been times when I just don't have the energy to knock out a show that night because I want to do right by you guys, by the everydayers, by the loyal listeners. And if I don't feel like I can put forth a show that I feel like is, a show that meets my standards, sometimes I'll take that night and I'll, sleep, wake up early the next morning, or try to at least, and then knock out a show where I do have the juice, the energy to do the show justice, basically.
And just as an everydayer, trust us, we get it. If I see there is no show first thing in the morning, I'm like, okay, I get it. Jackson's a human being also, it couldn't release until noon. That's okay. We understand. And final question for you on segment 2, and this kind of calls back to where we started. I'm very curious about the tension or change between what it was like being a Rockets fan growing up, right? Back in the Stevie franchise era, you kind of your childhood, teenage years, you were a fan. You follow the team with your heart. Now you are a credentialed media member. You have a certain responsibility as media. And as you say, when you're watching the game, you're just scribbling notes, right? It's a very professional operation. How is it different, even emotionally, if you will, between covering, watching the game as a fan and covering a team in this capacity? And how do you kind of navigate that change in emotion and vantage point?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've talked about this before. I know I have with other people, both maybe even on the show, but I think one of the things that makes this show so unique in how we cover and how I cover the team is that I don't hide my fandom. I do feel like the highs and the lows with the fans of the team, so when we're riding high and there's a win streak or a big, emotional victory, I'm feeling those emotions and it's fueling the show. Likewise, when we're in the trenches, when the going is kind of tough, when things are, kind of bleak, I'm also feeling those. And now I don't lean too far one way or the other. I try not to. And I try to at times be the voice of reason and try to reel things back, not get too high, not get too low, that kind of thing. But it has been a bit of a challenge, right? Because at times, in person, when you're there as credential media, you don't get to be a fan in person. Yeah. You can react and you can, oh my God, if something crazy happens, but you don't get to clap and cheer and stomp. And, when the Rockets do good things, or you don't get to yell and scream at the refs when you feel like they're getting screwed over. You don't get to do any of that, right? So you are very much separating the part of yourself that is a fan. And I will say it was really hard just personally for myself, kind of grappling with the differences. Because I remember for a few years after taking on the show and really getting into my craft and taking the notes and prepping for sure, I was like, I stopped being able to watch Rockets games with my dad because I like having my setup. I need my laptop or my computer in front of me. I'm taking my note, I'm preparing for doing the show. And it's hard to sometimes get out of that mentality of just being able to kick back, like you joked earlier, right? With a beer and just hanging out. Now these days I can do that for a low stakes game. If it's just Rockets Hornets at some point in the middle of the season, I don't need my whole setup with me. I can go hang out with some friends and have the game on, and and I can still absorb the information that I feel like I need to absorb, and then I'll still go back later and jot some things down, whatever, but I don't feel as black or white about it as I used to, and now I can kind of shift back and forth a little bit, take the fan hat on and off, as it were. So
amazing.
I know that we still got a lot more to get to here. We're going to get to some locked off Rockets content here coming up, some things that don't have anything to do remotely with the Houston Rockets, as well as I definitely feel like I need to at least include something about, a couple of interviews with players over the years, maybe something along those lines. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. FanDuel's awesome because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds in front of you. Right now, you can take a look at the odds-on favorites to win the Super Bowl this year over at FanDuel.com. Right now, the Bills and Ravens both plus 500 a piece. Right behind them, the Packers at plus 550, the Eagles at plus 700, and then in distant fifth place, the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 1400. So for all those odds and more, head on over to FanDuel.com. If you're ready to play, download FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
And final segment here on Locked On Rockets is Locked Off Rockets with Jackson Gatlin. less about Rockets and more about JG. So, Jackson, on your off days, what are those like? What do you do when you're not covering the team? I believe you told me that you hooped. You used to hoop. You still hoop. How do you fill your days when you're not covering a team?
I wish I wish I had more time, honestly, in my schedule to hoop the way that I used to. I haven't been able to hoop with any kind of regularity in a while. I really just need to find like a decent like Saturday morning kind of like league that I can consistently get up for. But here's the rub, Jeff, is, with the way the schedule works, off days are very subjective because in my schedule, I am beholden to what the Rocket schedule is for 9 months out of the year. And what that means is if they play a West Coast game starting at 9 or 9:30 Central Time on a Friday night, it's really hard to then do all that on a, and potentially record a show, at 1 or 2 in the morning on a, basically for Saturday morning. And then if I were to try to wake up with any regularity. So that's the thing, is it's really sometimes hard to keep a semblance of like a routine or a schedule because of, the randomness of the NBA schedule at the end of the day. That also sounds like a little bit of a cop-out. It's not that much of a big deal, but it certainly has made things challenging at times to be able to keep like some consistency. Like, oh, hey, like my friends have like a routine like Tuesday night thing that they do. And it's like, okay, great. Well, like I can be there on some Tuesdays, but like if the Rockets play, like I got to do that. So, off days for me, generally when the Rockets don't play, those are my off days. That's how I view it. And even then, we do the show Sunday through Thursday, right? For Monday through Friday consumption. Yep. And then every so often we'll do a show that drops on a Saturday or a Sunday, depending on when the team's playing or if it's a big game or maybe a big preview for a playoff game or something along those lines. So I almost consider it like there's almost no real kind of off days because even on those days in between games, Rockets are generally practicing or hosting a shoot around or something. And I try to attend as many of those as possible to also shape, and help the coverage, right? That's where so many of those interviews come from with players and coaches. And, I try to publish as many of those as possible on the YouTube channel for consumption over there. But outside of, basketball being such a, prominent feature in my life, both Rockets and non-Rockets, because, again, I do also cover the NBA at large for Locked On NBA. So once a week, I'm also hunkering down and watching every single game that happens in the NBA that night to be able to recap for our Locked On NBA game night show. And I'm also watching intermittently throughout the week. Like when there's a big matchup between two teams, a marquee matchup here or there, I try my best to tune in for those. So it's not just Rockets basketball that I'm, binge watching throughout the week. I'm a big gamer, man. Like I love video games.
What's your poison? What kind of games? When do you play? You want to share your call signs if folks can?
Oh man. Well, I will say, and I don't know how many listeners are aware of this, but I am a type 1 diabetic. And so my gamer tag on pretty much everything that I play is usually died of beatus. And that's always been like my screen name, screen tag for anything. So if you see a died of beatus floating around in a video game, it's probably me. But I, for years, dating all the way back to like middle school, it was funny because like I played basketball back in, middle school. I didn't play, in high school on the team. I played, on my own at the park or whatever with friends. But, middle school was where I like got hooked on, at the time, World of Warcraft. And so I was like a gigantic, like I was the cross between being like a video game dork, a jock because I was playing on the basketball team, and then also like a theater nerd because I also was in theater, and like I had like these different cliques or like friend groups or whatever, and they were all so just drastically different.
It's a wild Venn diagram overlap. I'm trying to
a little bit, right?
It.
Like I don't know how many people can say that they had the World of Warcraft theater nerd and like basketball like overlap at one point in time in their lives. But yeah, I played that for, upwards of like 10 years and, developed some really wonderful friendships. I'm actually, in a couple months, I'll be going to the wedding for one of my longtime online friends, who is the only online friend that I have that actually cares about basketball, and he's a diehard Phoenix Suns fan. So I've been giving him so much crap about the whole, KD, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks trade, and how, we can still lord the picks over them, and that we basically control their future. So that's been a ton of fun. But right these days, I don't do as much, play as many games as I, used to back in the day. I'll play, the big kind of AAA games when they come out. Red Dead Redemption 2 is like my all-time favorite game. That game, it has ruined other video games for me. That's how good it is at the end of the day. And when I want to play something with my friends, because at the end of the day, I think I realized that, I care maybe less about video games and more video games as a vehicle to be able to spend time with my online friends, because, they're thousands of miles away, right? We don't get to just, hang out in person or go down to the park and play basketball or go hang out at a coffee shop or anything like that. But, these days, play some League of Legends. I've been playing Peak a lot lately. That's a fun game if you guys haven't checked that out. It's about scaling a mountain that's different every single day, and it kind of sucks. Game really gives you like a reality check about how good you think you are at games when you kind of have to humble yourself by dying repeatedly trying to scale a stupid mountain. So it sounds maybe not as enticing.
It sounds like playoffs. Every year teams are trying to climb the mountain, and 29 out of 30 die.
There you go. Yeah. So that's the NBA peak right there. But no, I spend time with friends and family. I've got my little hobbies on the side that aren't sports related. And again, even when it's not work related, I'm still watching a ton of basketball. Now, I will say, to not disappoint people, I'm just not a big football or baseball guy. Like, I support the Texans and Astros. I'll tune in during like any play, like I'll tune in during like the playoff runs for the Astros and support them then. But like, I don't watch a lick of baseball or football. So when people start trying to talk to me about other sports, I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I have such a surface level. I will say, I love UFC. I do watch a lot of UFC. I get together with my friend Chris. We watch a ton of UFC. That's probably my second favorite sport outside of basketball, honestly.
Amazing. So I want to get to some memories in a moment, kind of favorites, interviews. Before we go there, if fantasy kind of time machine idea here, if you could be a Locked On Rockets host any season in the Rockets franchise history, what would you choose and why? And I might make the title runs off limits. There's an obvious, 94, 95. You win the title, can't top that. Putting those off the table, when do you want to dial in to be LOR?
Yeah, I honestly thought I almost wanted to put that as my own caveat, right? When I like as you were explaining this question, I was like, well, like immediately I'm thinking, yeah, title runs, like that's no question. But then I thought to myself, that's low hanging fruit. It's unfair.
Exactly.
So I'll answer it one way and then the other way. I'll say, if I can include the title runs, I think between the two title runs, I'd have to say the first title run, the 93-94, if only because that's the first title in franchise history. Thinking back about so many of the significant moments of finals going all the way to Game 7 against the Knicks, the battles between Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon, the block on John Starks in Game 6, like so many amazing memories and moments from that run, a run that I've gone back and watched multiple times, since I wasn't alive for that run, unfortunately. So I feel like between the two title runs, I'd pick that one, even though the 94-95 title run had some adversity, the
drama,
the comeback, the drama. Yeah. There's so much there, but I think I'd probably pick the first title run. If I could go to any season, not including the title runs, I'm torn on this. I'm torn between two seasons, and one of them I've got a lot more emotional attachment to, so I'm going to go with that one first. The 17-18 Rockets. And that was an era where the pod existed, right? Yeah. Ben was doing the Podfather was firing on all cylinders. But that 17-18 Rockets, the way that team played, how dominant they were, the fact that they were the one team that wasn't afraid of the KD era Warriors, and then going toe to toe with that Warriors team, all the highs and the lows, right? The injury to Chris Paul, the 0 of 27, like being able to have the opportunity to cover that and to react to that on the show would have been a once in a lifetime opportunity. And hopefully we have some seasons like that here upcoming with KD and Sengun and Amen, to be able to relive and think back to fondly about the show and doing it. But that would be my first choice, just because, James Harden is the greatest Rockets player of my lifetime, that I've been able to appreciate. So seeing him in his prime would be incredible, and covering him like that. And then I'll go honorable mention for the other one. The 86 finals run. So the 85-86 season, the Twin Towers lineup of Hakeem Olajuwon, Ralph Sampson, before Ralph started breaking down injury-wise, right? Like that would have been the beginnings, or it was the beginnings of what looked like, was going to be a very dominant era of Rockets basketball. And then unfortunately, the injuries kind of, derailed Ralph Sampson's career. And then we, got some, not lean years, but some, frustrating years for Hakeem before the Rockets went on the upswing, and then, hiring Rudy T as the coach, and the rest is history with the titles. So I'd probably go the 85-86 season as my honorable mention. Honorable mention there.
I love that. One I would, as an old head myself, I would throw in a season that everyone overlooks is Barkley's first year here. That was a big deal at the time, of like, he was still the kind of tail end of his prime, still had some juice. That was a fun season, but those are great choices. Final question for you, Jackson. You know this team so intimately. You've had so many amazing moments with the players, with the coaches. Give us a couple of your favorite memories of whether interviews or interactions, or kind of off camera stuff, whether just kind of, just chatting with folks. What stands out for you right now, years later?
Yeah, I think that, one thing that is really rewarding for me is, at the end of the day, I tell people this: if you meet me like out and about, just in the world, living life, whatever, I'm just a dude. Like, I'm the same way that I am on the show that I am off the show. Like, I don't try to put on like a personality or a mask, or I'm not like playing a character, like maybe, Screaming A. Smith or something like that. I'm just me, and I love basketball, and I love sharing my thoughts and opinions about the team. And, I try to educate myself as much as possible to be a good source for news, for insight, for breakdowns about what's going on with the team. But what really helps me is when other people, other NBA players, coaches, agents, scouts, who they tell me they're like, yeah, I've listened to your stuff. You're really good. You know what you're talking about. Cause that adds so much to me, where I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, I'm not just some guy who's just talking out of his ass, and it is a really rewarding thing for me to, have cultivated some of those relationships, and to be able to kind of reinforce that what I'm doing, is good at the end of the day, and good being subjective, right? Because at the end of the day, there's still going to be people who are like, he's a Jalen Green hater, or, oh my God, he doesn't like Alperen Sengun, or he doesn't believe in Amen Thompson's future, or he hates Fred VanVleet. Like, and you're never going to please anybody, right? Like, I hear some of these and I'm just like, I defended Fred so much. Like, I really don't know. So anyways, that's an inside joke for you there, Jeff. But for me, one moment really does stand out, and shout out to, ex-Houston Rocket, Josh Christopher Jagup, because, even though his tenure with the Rockets was short-lived, there was a moment where I think it was his second year with the team. We were leaving a charity event. We were walking out of Toyota Center, and Josh was walking with a couple of his friends, and I was behind them. We all get in the elevator to go out, and he sees me there, and, the players know me, off camera, off the court, whatever. And he goes, "Oh, what's up, Gatlin?" Like, and he was like, I love your pod, man. It's fire. And I was like, whoa, what? And it was a cool thing, because this came like not 2 or 3 weeks after I had kind of gone in on him on the podcast. Like, I was being really critical of Josh and the fact that he like wasn't doing certain things on the floor, that he needed to improve in XYZ. And like, hearing from a player that I was being critical of, like, hey, like, what you're doing is good, like, keep up the good work or whatever. I try my best to be objective, and I know that I'm not always objective. I know that sometimes I can get in my own biases at times, and I try to check myself. But moments like that, are so important to me. And so that was certainly a really cool, like, milestone moment. And just, over time, like, different interactions with players, being able to chat a little bit about, what they've done, out on the court, or some of what they're thinking. I remember after this, after the Game 7 loss, you know, I had a very brief talk with like Al P, like out in the hallway, just like, you know, and he was so like kind of down on himself. He was really disappointed. He took the loss really, really hard. And I was like, hey man, you fought hard. You played incredible. Like, don't worry. Like, you'll get so many more chances down the line. He was like, I appreciate that, Jackson. Thank you. Like, thank you. And just like moments like that are just really cool. And you don't get those on camera. Right. But they still mean so much. And I will say of interviews and stuff that I've done over the years, like, having the opportunity to like ask like LeBron James a question or talk to like Greg Popovich before he retired officially and things like that. Like, you don't even like the weight. I will say the weight of asking Greg Popovich a question. I never got popped. Thank goodness. Like, I never did. He's like had like an occasional like smirk or like smile, because I've asked him a few questions over the years, but like I never got Popovich. Thank goodness. I will say Steven Adams is one of the most wholesome interviews in the entire NBA. He's one of the coolest dudes. And when you ask him like a good basketball question, he gives you such an incredible answer. And I respect that so much from the players and coaches who take the time to do that. Because I really do try to take the time when I'm asking questions to think of insightful, thought-provoking questions that will hopefully lead to some really good, not just good material, but like some insight into how the players and coaches themselves are functioning or how they're viewing things, because they're the experts, they're the professionals. I don't pretend to be. And so it's my job to try and divulge that information, right? Try and get that from them. And Ime Udoka is the same way, right? If you ask Ime a really good like X's and O's question, he generally does a great job of breaking down the game and explaining his reasoning for doing certain things on the floor, which I genuinely respect so much out of him.
Well, on that note, I cannot wait for your interactions with KD this year. That is going to be a blast. And Jackson, I know we're out of time, but I so enjoyed this. And I will say, on behalf of the everydayers, we appreciate you. I made the joke before we hit record that, you know, I listen as an everydayer, as most everydayers. We hear your voice in our head, whether it's in the gym, on the way to work. We hear your voice in our AirPods or in our car or whatever, literally more than almost any other voice on the planet. So thank you for always bringing this great content, illuminating Rockets, kind of inside the team and outside the team. It's an amazing lay of the land. So Jackson, thank you so much for all you do. Appreciate you.
Well, no, thank you, Jeff. This was an awesome experience. And, you know, when you presented this idea to me originally, I won't say I was skeptical about it, but I was like, how's this going to work? Like, it's so weird. It was such a foreign concept to me, but I think it was executed perfectly. And you were the right person, you know, for me to be able to trust and to run this thing. So I do really appreciate your time here. Let me do this really quick. I'm going to flip us back. I'm going to take my host chair back. Do us all a favor. Let everybody know where everybody can track down your content at.
Thank you, Jackson. Again, my name is Jeff Wilser on Twitter and X at Jeff Wilser, and my podcast on AI. If you're at all curious about AI, it's called AI Curious.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.